And away we go. Welcome back, everybody. Glad to see you all today. Um, this is Today is Thursday, January 15th. We're continuing our discussion of Numbers chapter 25, the sordid saga of a man named Pinchas, who we've been talking about Pinchas for the last 2 weeks. I want to conclude his story today, but he casts a very long shadow. See, the story, as we've discovered at the beginning of chapter 25, is that the men of Israel in the wilderness at this place called Baal Peor commit these um, sexual crimes with the women, with Moabite women in that place. It's a catastrophe in the mind of the biblical author that leads to grave destruction that would have been much worse, except for the act of an individual named Pinchas, who steps forward, especially at a moment where one of the Israelite men, who it turns out is uh, is the son of one of the leaders of the one of the Israelite tribes, and comes forward with his consort, one of the Moabite women, who it turns out happens to be a Moabite princess. We only discover that in the addendum at the end of the story. Well, Pinchas is so enraged by their behavior at the heart of the Ohel Moed, of the tent of meeting, this place of great sanctity, that he rams through the two of them with his spear, and killing them both. And the Torah says at that moment the plague against the Israelite was checked. Then there's a break in the text, and the new weekly Torah portion begins. This is a review of what we did last time. And Pinchas, in this act of vigilante justice, is remembered with great favor by the Torah text itself. We'll reread again to get on the same page about how the Torah seems to endorse this act of vigilante justice that Pinchas committed with great praise. The topic of our discussion last time when we were together is the plain reading of the Torah text seems to be that God endorses Pinchas's action. The rabbis subsequently have grave reservations about Pinchas. That even though the Torah endorses what he does, the rabbis say we can't have a community of zealots going around behaving this way because it's for all sorts of reasons. Um, Socially, it's not a good foundation for a society, and morally, they're pretty ambivalent about Pinchas's behavior. So we had a whole lot of rabbinic texts last week that showed how even though the Torah presents something that seems obviously um, endorsing Pinchas's behavior, we read about how the lens of Jewish tradition is far more ambivalent about vigilante justice. I thought it was a good conversation. I had a great time being with you last time. I hope you did as well. Lots of food for thought. Let's reread the text of the second half of the story. And I want to do something particular today. I didn't want to leave Pinchas's story without focusing on one unique, kind of interesting aspect of this text. It wants to focus on one verse in particular. But in the meantime, let's reread what happened. So I'm going to need a volunteer who would like to read this story for us. And I know this is a review from what we did last time, but let's talk about where the Torah portion begins with verse 10 and read through just verse 15, just 10 through 15. Who's going to read for us, please?
I'll do it.
Great. Thank you. And it's on the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. I always have to check because I screw that up left and right. Thank you,
Yeah.
Cheryl. Go ahead.
It's kind of little.
What's that? It's
The
little.
print, yeah.
Oh, boy, I have it on 150. Okay, I'll make it 200 will
Seven.
be huge. How about
Okay.
a little
Oh,
better?
that's better. Yeah. That's pretty good.
See, I've got it on one of those really big side screens, so it looks
Okay.
huge to
Thank
me.
you.
But thank you for saying that. You can always point those
That's
things out.
great.
Go ahead. Start up here.
Okay. So God spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas, Son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by displaying among them his passion for me, so that I did not wipe out the Israelite people in my passion. Say therefore, I grant him my pact of friendship. It shall be for him and his descendants after him a pact of priesthood for all time, because he took impassioned action for his God, thus making expiation for the Israelites. The name of the Israelite who was killed, the one who was killed with the Midianite woman, was Zimri, son of Salu, chieftain of a Simeonite ancestral house. The name of the Midianite woman who was killed was Cosbi, daughter of Zur. He was the tribal head of an ancestral house in Midian.
Great. Thanks, Cheryl. Okay, so we did that last time. I don't want to repeat the stuff we talked about last time. Um, Hopefully I made my point about like the ambivalence that the rabbis have for zealots and vigilantes in our midst. But we can't get away from the fact that the text itself says not only does it endorse what Pinchas did, but seems to give Pinchas two rewards. One of those rewards is this, and more specifically, not just rewards, but he receives two kinds of brit. The Hebrew word brit is an important Torah word, obviously. It's a bris in Yiddish language, right? Brit means covenant, and it's one of the Torah's favorite words. Appears over and over again throughout the Torah. God, one of the primary things that the God of the Torah does is God makes covenants with partners, with human partners. So one of these things is the Brit Kahuna, which our translator chose to translate as the pact of the priesthood. Means for all of subsequent generations, going through the days of the first temple in Jerusalem, that the priests who officiate, the high priests who officiated in the temple, were descendants of Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron. And he gets another gift as well, another brit. In the previous verse, God says he can have briti shalom, my covenant, my brit of shalom. And for some reason, our translator chose my pact of friendship, which I guess is an accurate reading of the word shalom, but I think the translation lets us down a little bit there because we know that shalom is a much more multifaceted and powerful word than just to say my pact of friendship. So for our purpose today, let's say he gets this brit shalom. The question is, what does that mean? Because that's nice. It's not explained at all. God says, okay, because Pinchas did this act and stopped the plague by spearing these two people, he gets my brit shalom. And our question is going to be, what in the world does that mean? In fact, we want to zoom in on something even more specific. Now I'm on the source sheet. I think I put a link to the source sheet in the chat for those who like to download these things. This verse, say therefore, I grant to him my brit shalom, my covenant of shalom, in verse 12, is written in a special way in Torah scrolls, in every Torah scroll. Go into the synagogue. See, this is where Zoom lets us down a little bit too, because would that we were all in a classroom together somewhere in a Jewish space. I'd take everybody over, I'd take out one of the Torah scrolls from the Ark, unroll it, we'd find this verse, and you'd find something rather remarkable. In this verse of the Torah, the word shalom is written in a special way. That's what this image is doing here on the screen. In this place, and uniquely in this place, the word shalom, the vav of that letter, is broken in half. You see it? That a vav should just be a straight vertical line here, but this vav is broken into two pieces. Does everybody see that? Because everything we're going to talk about for the next 45 minutes is going to be based on that. There's a marvelous book that came out just a couple of years ago by a great Torah teacher who has sadly passed away. The book was published posthumously, called Scribal Secrets by James Diamond, where he talks about I love this kind of book because I got this kind of brain that he talks about all the like weird idiosyncratic parts of the Torah where it's written in a funny way. You know, if you ever took a good hard look at the Torah scroll, you'd know that there's certain words and phrases that get written idiosyncratically. Um, I'm not just talking about the crowns on top of the letters, which are sort of ubiquitous throughout the entire Torah. I'm talking about there's certain places where this letter is always written extra small, or another place where this letter is written superscript up at the, above the line of the rest of the letters. And this one place, it's the only letter in the entire Torah where it is supposed to be written, the Vav of Shalom in this word is broken in half. Here's the passage from Diamond's book, just talking about this. And this is what's so unusual about this. Throughout the halacha, he writes, it is stressed that letters written by a scribe in a Torah scroll must be complete and whole. If they're faded or only partly legible, then the work is pasul, invalid. That's what this means. If you're reading a Torah scroll in the synagogue and one of the letters is smudged or broken in half or whatever, um, then that Torah scroll itself is not kosher. Not kosher for the purpose of the ritual of reading it in the synagogue. And it has to be set aside to be repaired until it can be used again. Every letter of a Torah counts and needs to be there. You can write that sermon yourself also. The letters of the Torah are like human beings. And if one of them is diminished or missing or her voice is absent, then the entire community is damaged and sort of not whole. Okay, but that's not my point here. That's just a nice little homiletical aside. But this is so unusual that a letter that is smudged or broken renders a Torah scroll not kosher, with one exception. There's one exception where the scribe is mandated to make the letter incomplete. The letter in question is the Vav in the word shalom in Numbers chapter 25:12. This must be written with a break in the vertical line according to this 14th century Spanish authority. Okay, so now I'm going to take down the screen in the middle. The rest of our class today, I want to talk about the broken Vav because there's a lot of kind of cool traditions about it. But before we talk about that, I'd love to hear your gut responses about what does this tradition mean uniquely? I'm putting just 25 back again. That God says to Moses about Pinchas, I grant him my Brit Shalom. And that the tradition says the Shalom is broken. Your turn. Tell me in your best sermon sort of interpretive voice why you're asked on Shabbat morning to give this teaching in front of the community. Why is the word shalom broken? Marcia.
I wonder if it's because what God is rewarding is the goal is peace, but violence was the way to get there. And then he changed his mind. It's violence leads to violence instead of violence leads to peace.
And thus says Reb Marcia. That's a nice teaching. Okay. John, you got thank you for that. John.
I think it's a commentary, it's a criticism of the text. It's a withholding maybe of the praise on Pinchas. It can't be a whole shalom, a whole peace, if it's arrived at, like Marcia said, by violence.
Okay. Good. We got two pacifists already in the room. Maybe there's more. That's good. Cheryl, you're a pacifist, right? Okay, go ahead, Cheryl. Let's hear it. Why is the Vav broken, Cheryl? You're still muted. There you go.
I think it's because it's conditional, that it may be God is requiring or anticipating that in order to make the shalom kosher and complete, it's up to a certain response from his partner or the other party to fix it and make it.
Who's the other party?
This is, are we talking about Pinchas
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. Oh, God's other party is Pinchas, you're saying.
Right.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's very nice. So that's an endorsement. That's a thumbs up for Pinchas's behavior, right? Cool. Nothing wrong with that. There's a long, as we've seen, that's the plain text of the Torah, is that it's a thumbs up for his behavior. So that's good. Anybody else before we get to some of the commentaries? Marcia, you got more. Okay.
Because God, he's rewarding that action of the spearing. On the other hand, he's also saying that they are humans and he's mourning their death.
Last thing, Ian, he's warning what?
Their death. They
Mourning. I heard warning.
yeah.
Okay. Oh, and you're talking about the two who were slain, or
They're
maybe all
human.
the ones who were slain in the plague
Right.
that happened before. That shalom seems a little bit bitter to
Yeah.
speak of shalom at a moment like this when there's so much destruction, so much residual damage. Shalom seems a little bit bitter and a little bit ironic, and that's the brokenness of it. I'm putting words into your mouth, Marcia, but I like
That's what I mean. You said
okay,
it
good.
better.
Okay, good. Well, needless to say, this is a tradition that's very, very old. In fact, maybe I'll take a moment. Cheryl's your hand up from before, or
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, okay, no problem. Um, let's say a word about like the where things like this come from, and then we'll spend the rest of our class interpreting it. The idea of the broken vav here is very old. The rabbis of the Talmud, at least, recognize it. They say, oh, the vav in that letter is broken. Let's say a quick word about writing down Torah scrolls. The act of writing down the words of the Torah, well, they're found in the Torah itself, of course, that God dictates the Torah to Moses, who writes it down on Mount Sinai. And then in the book of Deuteronomy, it talks about writing the words of this Torah and periodically reading it out loud to the whole community. So obviously, there's a long tradition about how to write a Torah as well. And it's interesting that there, as you can imagine, with a large book or a large number of books like the Torah encompasses, that there'd be discrepancies and differences that would leak into the way different traditions wrote down Torah. Sometimes because different communities had different traditions, and sometimes because scribes make mistakes. There's lots of reasons for discrepancies from one scroll to another. This is the reason why the Dead Sea Scrolls are so exciting to scholars and readers of the Bible, because the Dead Sea Scrolls preserve fragments of biblical texts. They're the oldest fragments of biblical texts that we have. And what's so interesting is not all the ways in which it's the same. What's interesting in the Dead Sea Scrolls is when you have a passage from like the book of Isaiah that varies from the standard text of Isaiah that we've been using for thousands of years. That's what when you hear all this talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's one of its key the key ways in which they're significant. Anyhow, so Jewish tradition tried throughout the years to standardize how a Torah is written. There's a book that was written around the same time that the Talmud came together. It's published in the Talmud as what a so-called minor tractate. It's called the Book of Sofrim, and it's all about the traditions and rules about how to write a kosher Torah scroll. As the Middle Ages dawned, it turns out that there was still a wide discrepancy in certain places of how Torahs and other biblical books were preserved in different communities around the world. So there were scribes in the early medieval period who tried to standardize the Torah text. Um, these people are called Masoretes, and the tradition of from Masorah, which means tradition, received tradition, transmitted tradition. The Masoretes in the ninth and 10th centuries, especially in the town of Tiberias in northern Israel on the Sea of Galilee, were especially important. They tried to bring together the different traditions that Jewish communities all around the world had in their written traditions and tried to kind of standardize the text. So, what they would do is they would go through the Torah and make the decisions. This word was spelled this way in one community and this way in another community. We are going to vote and decide this is the right way to do it. And in the margins of our book, we'll write other communities. Here's the discrepancies. Here's the minority opinions about how this stuff is written. So they wrote these codices of what we would call today critical editions of the books of the Bible. The reason why I'm telling you all this is sometimes when I build up to stuff, it's because I'm building up to a book. The most famous of these from the 9th and 10th century Masoretes was a manuscript that came to be called the Aleppo Codex. It started in Tiberias during the time of the Crusades. That particular book was that manuscript was brought down to Egypt, where for a number of years it sat on Maimonides' desk, the great Maimonides. I don't know that he had a desk, but I presume he had a desk. And on it was his book. He had the Aleppo Codex, and he said, this is the most authoritative standard edition about how the Hebrew Bible should be written, how the Torah should be written. After Maimonides, somehow the book made its way up to Aleppo, Syria, and that's why it acquired the name the Aleppo Codex. For the Jews of Aleppo, I have a very good friend who is of that community, the Aleppo Jews, and he says his grandfather talks about seeing that book, about how it was kept it had acquired such a holy status, probably because of the Maimonides connection, that it was kept in a special storage thing in the synagogue in Aleppo, and sometimes bar mitzvah boys were allowed to take it out and touch it, like on their bar mitzvah day, that sort of thing. What happened to the Aleppo Codex and to the Jewish community of Aleppo? After 1947, when the United Nations voted to partition the land of Israel into a Jewish state and an Arab state, like in lots of um, places around the Arab world, there were terrible riots in Aleppo. They burnt the synagogue to the ground, and people were feared that the Aleppo Codex was gone, burnt, and lost forever. And so it was for a couple of years. And then something weird started happening. Little fragments of it started showing up in weird and unexpected places. Apparently, what happened is as their ghetto was burning, the rabbis took the codex and tore it up into pieces. And they gave one piece to your family, and one piece to that family, and one piece to that family, and said, hang on to this while our community is burning. And there are no Jews in Aleppo anymore. Many of them went to Israel. Many of them went other places, including a really large. We have New Jersey people on our call. One of the largest Syrian Jewish communities in the world outside of Israel today is in Deal, New Jersey, down at the Jersey Shore. And you ask them about the Aleppo Codex, especially the old timers, and they'll say, oh, yeah, we know about that. Anyway, some of these pieces came back together. We don't have the entire text. Some of it was lost, maybe lost forever, but some of it has been reconstructed from these scraps and you can go see it at the Shrine of the Book at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This is the book. The book is called the Aleppo Codex. This isn't the Aleppo Codex. This is a nonfiction story about what happened to the Aleppo Codex. This is one of those books that's by a fabulous Israeli author named Mati Friedman. Um, this is one of those books, if you like this kind of thing, it's one of those nonfiction books that reads like a great adventure novel because the story, I've just given you the broadest outlines of this powerful book being torn up and thought disappeared, but actually hidden away in people's homes. But there's more to that. What Mati Friedman discovers as he researches it is people who get too close. I mean, there's a story here of politics and corruption and bribery and violence and scandal and all of this stuff. And what he discovers is lots of researchers who get a little bit too close to the source of what happened to the Aleppo Codex. They have a bad habit of dying.
Oh,
So there's also all sorts of intrigue and even murder at the heart of the story. Anyway, Mati Friedman's The Aleppo Codex is about that. Why am I telling you all that? I'm telling you all that because the Aleppo Codex also, its most fundamental importance is it's a place that preserves all these traditions about how the Torah scroll was written, including the letters that are small, the letters that are superscript. And this is where we learn the establishment that it is with the authority of Jewish law that every Torah scroll in Numbers chapter 25, verse 12, has to be written this way. This word shalom is broken with this broken vav. And now, 12:30, now the second half of our class can be, let's read some text from the tradition about what in the world this means. Why is this vav broken from the Aleppo Codex and beyond? But first, Renata.
I was thinking back before when we were talking about how the Torah scroll was, reminded me that God gave Moses transcribed the Torah scroll, and I think he's the one who made the broken letter. That's what came to my mind.
Yeah,
And
great.
then written
That's a
following
cool
it.
interpretation too. I like that a lot. Let's see if there's anything close to that on the text. By the way, anybody in the room any of you familiar with this book? No? If you like, if that sounds like your kind of book, I strongly recommend it. You know, that nonfiction sounds um, like a great adventure story. John Adler, I think he'd love that book.
I I heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's really good. Okay, so, and then you got to go to Israel and go to the Israel Museum and see the Aleppo Codex, such as it is today, with your own eyes. Let's go to some interpretations. Everything we'll do for the next half hour will be why is the Vav broken in when God says, I give him my covenant of peace? And for that matter, what does covenant of shalom mean anyway? Why is that Pinchas's gift from God? Why is that the appropriate gift for what he's done here? Okay, the first couple of texts on the page here are going to be in praise of Pinchas, which is good in conformance with the plain meaning of the Torah text. The Torah endorses what Pinchas did, and some of these interpretations are going to say that broken vav is further praise of Pinchas's deed. Let's go through them one at a time. Cheryl Lester, can I call on you again to keep reading? To read some of the
Yes.
commentaries on the page. Let's
Yeah.
start with Rashi. Rashi's always a good place to start. So of course, Rashi has the broken vav in front of him too. Let's see what he tells us. Go ahead.
My covenant of shalom. This means that my covenant should be to him as a covenant of peace, like when a person shows gratitude to and friendliness to one who does some kindness for him. Here too, the Holy and Blessed One expressed gratitude to him.
Okay, pretty straightforward interpretation. Nothing too elaborate here from Rashi. In fact, Rashi's interpretation is the exact same interpretation that our translator had. Our translator said, we translate this as my pact of friendship. I think the translators were purposely invoking Rashi, who said, Pinchas is my guy. He turned back my wrath from the community. He gets this special loving friendship from me for his deed. I don't have too much more to say about that, except Rashi gives Pinchas's deed a big thumbs up. Um, a generation later, sorry about my typo here. Can I? Oh, I can. Um, in uh, uh, a generation later from Rashi in Spain, Ibn Ezra has a slightly different interpretation. He's going to say it's not just friendship, this idea of shalom, but this is actually precisely what Pinchas needs at this moment for a very specific reason. Um, let's read it and then unpack what Ibn Ezra says. It's also very short and to the point. Cheryl, would you?
Yeah. My covenant of shalom. This means Pinchas should not fear retribution from the family of Zimri, for Zimri was a prince in his father's house. Pinchas was rewarded with the covenant of priesthood for himself and his descendants, for all the high priests were descendants of Pinchas, even though it is possible that Eleazar had other sons.
Yeah, that second half is kind of interesting, but I'm really focused on the first half. Why would Zimri? This says that Pinchas is specially protected by God, that he can live in peace, meaning unmolested. Why is this what Pinchas needs at this moment? Because of fear of retribution from the family of Zimri. What is that talking about? That's talking about biblical justice here. The Bible, among other things, comes out of the Middle East. The Middle East isn't such a peaceful place, never has been. There's this notion in the Bible and in some places in the Middle East, right up to this very day, of like blood avengers. If you killed somebody in this family, the family is entitled, out of a sense of duty and justice, to kill somebody in your family. In other words, you might have expected, in this Middle Eastern sense of justice, that Zimri's family, who Pinchas killed, should be able to come back in a sense of justice and kill Pinchas. God says, nope, that's what my Brit Shalom means. He can live at peace, that there can be no retribution from Zimri's family. Again, we're not necessarily on a high spiritual plane here, but we're trying to understand why is the covenant of shalom exactly the appropriate thing that Pinchas needs at this moment. And you might say, so he doesn't have to spend the rest of his life sleeping with one eye open, afraid that Zimri's family are going to exact retribution for his death. Seems like a good interpretation to me. Renata?
No, you just calling me before. I'm sorry. You had to lower up your
Oh, your
hand.
hand's still up from before. Okay, gotcha. Um, but I put these things on the page in order because I think we're getting towards slightly more sophisticated or more sublime interpretations here. So let's go forward a few more centuries to Rabbi Sforno in Italy in the 16th century. And let's see what he has to say about this Brit Shalom, this covenant of peace. We haven't said too much about the brokenness of the Vav yet, but maybe we'll get there. Cheryl, a little more. This is
Sure.
Sforno in Italy.
Okay, my covenant of shalom, according to Sforno in Italy. That is peace in the face of the angel of death. We have a similar meaning of shalom in Job 25:20. Oseh shalom b'mramav, who makes peace in the heavens. That is, the angel of death has no authority in divine realms. Now this covenant of shalom was fulfilled with Pinchas, who lived much longer than all his contemporaries, to such an extent that he even served as the priest in Shiloh at the time of the concubine of Giva in Judges 20:28, which occurred after the death of Joshua and the elders, Joshua 24:31. This is even more true if, as our rabbis suggest in a midrash, that Pinchas is equated with Elijah, who continues to live and endure.
All right.
Wow.
So the Sforno is playing with us a little bit. He knows some Midrash traditions that we haven't talked to. I think I alluded to them last time, but we haven't talked much about them. Pinchas lives a long, long life after this event. He appears again as a character in the book of Joshua, long after Moses is gone, after the Israelites have settled in the land of Israel. He appears at a story towards the end of the book in chapter 24 of the book of Joshua, and he appears as a peacemaker, thank God. Um, what Sforno knows is that there's an old tradition that equates Pinchas and Elijah because there's a lot of similarities about their paths. Like Pinchas, Elijah starts off as a zealot, as a pretty fanatical advocate for God, who's also inclined towards violence. This is a famous incident where he slaughters all these so-called prophets of the Canaanite god Baal
Hmm.
on a mountain outside of Haifa. And and Elijah is somehow in the imagination of the rabbis, two things happen. One is he gets transformed from the pages of the Bible, where he's a pretty violent, retributive figure. He becomes a symbol of messianic peace in the future. At Havdalah, every Shabbat, we sing Eliyahu Hanavi, that Elijah the prophet should come. As this Shabbat is leaving, Elijah the prophet should come and bring us these blessings of peace. He started out as this violent vigilante figure and emerged as a symbol of peace. That sounds like Pinchas. The other thing that Elijah did was Elijah doesn't die.
Hmm.
Elijah in the Bible gets taken up to heaven in this flaming chariot, if you remember that story, and never does it say Elijah died. That's why Elijah keeps showing up in Jewish legend and lore, in the study hall, in the lives of the rabbis, with the poor, with the desperate, with the homeless sitting outside the gates of the city. They say, you want to find Elijah? You want to find the Messiah? That's where he can be found, with the most desperate, hurting cast off of the community. That's where messianic promises lie. Um, so so they equate Pinchas with Elijah, and if that's the case, this Brit Shalom in Sforno's interpretation means his peace even in the face of the angel of death. In other words, he gets to live forever because he becomes transformed into Elijah the prophet himself. We are very far removed from the plain reading of the Torah text here at this point, but this is Midrash. And it sees a lot of parallels between Pinchas's career and Elijah's career. So many parallels that they're willing to say maybe it was even the same person. That's what I can do with Sforno. Anybody want to add to that or want to comment on the commentary? Okay, we haven't said much about the Broken Vav yet, so we got to keep moving. Um, although, right before we get to the Broken Vav, just one more beautiful comment. We'll call on Cheryl to read one more. This beautiful comment from a more modern figure, 19th century, the rabbi known as the Netziv, who was a major figure in 19th century Judaism because he was the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin in Lithuania. And the Volozhin yeshiva was the place, was the incubator of so many. It's remarkable how many of major Jewish figures in Eastern Europe in the 19th century. I'll just leave it at that. In other words, he's not a random figure. He's a heavy hitter in modern Jewish history, and he has a beautiful interpretation of this covenant of shalom. One more for us, Cheryl.
Okay. In reward for turning away the wrath of the Holy and Blessed One, God blessed him with the attribute of peace, that he should not be quick-tempered or angry. Since it would be natural that such a deed as this, killing human beings with his hands, would leave an intense emotional unrest afterward, the blessing he received was the promise of tranquility of the soul and peace.
Well, we're finally starting to get somewhere, in my opinion. Those first couple of interpretations are nice, they're useful, but they don't really speak to me on a very deep level. This one starts to. Why does he need a covenant of peace? Because he officiated at this act of violence. The violence might have been just. The Torah assumes that it was just. But violence still leaves a mark on somebody's soul, even if it's just. as, I don't know, it just seems like an obvious fact to me, but also as, I don't know, generations of soldiers who have come back from war with PTSD can attest to the idea that violence, even when committed in the name of right and justice, still leaves a mark on the soul. And this interpretation says the Brit Shalom means that's exactly what Pinchas needs. Through his act of violence, he should still somehow find this shalom in his soul. I think that's a beautiful interpretation. Anybody want to respond to that?
Sounds like he's being forgiven.
Yeah. But yes, but again, the plain sense of the Torah says he doesn't need to be forgiven of anything. He didn't do anything wrong. He did it exactly right. But sometimes, even when you do right, you do it at a cost. And that's what's forgiven, the cost, that's what's healed in Pinchas, according to this interpretation. I think that's rather beautiful. Sometimes we do right, and still it takes a toll on us. Okay, we haven't said much about the broken Vav, though, and we are going to now. So that's what's below the line here. This broken Vav in the word shalom, there's lots of interpretations about it, and I've just thrown onto the page some of my favorites and some of the ones I think were most compelling. We have spoken up until this point in praise of Pinchas. Most of the rest of the interpretations are going to express ambivalence about Pinchas, and that's what the brokenness is. Like, for instance, this famous 20th century Rabbi Kolage, in his book just about the Torah itself, he mentions it's not a Torah commentary, it's a book about like the tradition of writing the Torah and the Torah service in the synagogue. But he also brings in this point about just as God promised the covenant peace as a reward, but the Masoretes, remember the Masoretes up in Tiberias, they were concerned about the violence perpetrated by Pinchas, and they wanted to make the point that violence and peace are ultimately not compatible. They accomplished this by establishing the practice that the scribe should leave a break in the vertical line that forms the Vav and Shalom. So that sounds like the first impulses of Marcia and John and others who chose a more pacifist sort of interpretation of this text, that there's something incompatible about violence and peace. That's why his peace is a broken one. So he's affirming what you guys said. But maybe there's more subtle readings of it, as I propose that there are. Cheryl, you did a great job. Is there another reader who wants to pick it up for the rest of the day today? We have a few more good ones here. I hope you're enjoying this. Another reader? Marsha, are you volunteering? Okay, great. If you would. You want to read some Talmud for us? Here's a passage from the Talmud. So already in the Talmud, they already knew that the Vav was written in this broken way. That's even long before the Masoretes. The Talmud had this tradition. So let's see what they have to say.
From where do we derive the rule that a priest who is physically blemished may not officiate the sacrifices? Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel from the verse, "Say therefore, I grant him my pact of friendship." The Talmud objects to this.
Oh, no, you missed this.
Oh.
Yeah, you mean this part. This is the key.
Oh, yes, I see. Numbers 25:12. When he is shalem, whole, but not when he is lacking a body part.
Okay, so the rabbis derive a law of, about priests and sacrifices from this. They say they have a law that says that a priest in the temple who has a physical blemish or is missing a limb, is really what they mean, is missing a limb, is not kosher to officiate the sacrifices for Israel. And they learn this from this verse about Pinchas. It says, Shalem. Shalem is related to shalom, obviously. Shalem means whole or complete. So they say, oh, the verse says that that the priest has to be shalem. And then we have this sort of a little bit silly, convoluted conversation, or the objection at least. Keep going, Marcia. The Talmud objects.
The Talmud objects to this, but the verse says shalom, not shalem. The dispute is resolved. Rav Nachman said the Vav in shalom is broken and appears in the scroll as shalem.
So let's go back to the image. If you break a vav in half, like you do here, what you're left with is half of a vav that looks like this. Looks very much like another Hebrew letter. It looks like the Hebrew letter yud. And if this is a yud, not a vav, the word doesn't say shalom, then the word says shalem. And that's what they're doing. But maybe they're saying something, even though they're deriving law from this, maybe they're also saying what we've been saying before. There's something incomplete. There's something not whole. Or maybe conversely, they're saying he is whole about that. But either way, they're saying they're drawing our attention to the question of wholeness versus brokenness in this story. Okay? Keep that in mind. Let's get by that. That one's too wacky. Well, it's not totally wacky. Let's see how much time we have. We have 11 minutes. I got three more on the page, I think. Um, well, all right, sure. This one's not so ethical. It's not about ethics or anything like that. It's just a little bit of the rabbis having fun with what does it mean if the word is shalem and not shalom? They learned something kind of fun. I threw this on the page just because it caught my imagination a little bit. Go ahead, Marcia, read this one too.
Okay, should I start with in the Midrash?
Yeah, exactly.
In the Midrash Sifrei, Pinchas 131, we learn that 80 of Pinchas's descendants would serve as high priests in the days of the first temple, and 300 of his descendants would serve as high priests in the second temple. This
Okay.
is
So this is, I mean, let's go with it and presume that it's telling the truth. I didn't do the fact checking myself, but remember, Pinchas becomes the progenitor for future high priests, and it just so happens that if you had a book of the genealogies of Israel, 80 of his descendants would be there during the days of the first temple. Then the Babylonian exile happens, and then 300 would be high priests in the second temple until it's destroyed by the Romans. 380 make up 380. Okay. What does that have to do with anything? Go ahead.
This is hinted at. This is hinted at in this verse. The vav of the word shalom is broken and appears as a yud. So the word seems to be shalem. In Gematria, the word shalem equals 380. 300 plus 30 plus 10 plus 40 equals 380.
You know, I love stuff like that and share them with you whenever possible, when there's a sort of a whimsical interpretation like this. For those who have gotten lost, gematria, you'll recall, is the tradition that in Hebrew all the letters also equal numbers. And therefore the numerical value of certain words must have certain cosmic significance.
Mhm.
The word shalem equals 380. And it just so happens that Pinchas had exactly 380 descendants who served as priests over the next 1,000 years of Jewish history. Okay. Um, if that stuff leaves you cold, don't worry about it. It's not that important. And if you get excited about that stuff that like I do, it's because Torah is supposed to be a pleasure, among other things. And I think I love stuff like that. But let's get back to the ethics of this thing. Is this conversation helping clarify for anybody in your own mind about what lesson are we supposed to take away from this story of Pinchas's vigilante justice? And then the Torah says, yeah, you get shalom, but the shalom is a broken shalom. And we've seen some interpretations that said that's to Pinchas's praise. That's part of the reward that he gets. And we're seeing now a couple that say this is part of the tradition of saying we don't want too many more Pinchases in our communities. You can go down either path, as we saw last week, and that's sort of what I'm trying to do this week as well. There's a few more. I got two more for you. One is Kabbalah, and one is then just a concise summing up. But but I hope this is doing some things to you to like think about like the the text itself, but also the way in which the lens of tradition in which we approach the text, which says we've got a lot more hesitation about who and what Pinchas is because we've experienced enough Pinchases in our communities over the years to say we don't want too many more of them. Marcia?
This is a question. It pertains to an argument that I had with my son Jamie before Israel, before this class, and that it makes me think of what's happening in Israel. The violence perpetrated on Gaza, can it be excused? And this passage suggests that it can. And what do you think about that, Rabbi?
Well, listen, um, excuse doesn't seem like the right word. The question that everybody has to ask is that war a just war or not? And if it's a just war, was it conducted justly? Smart, ethical people are going to come to different conclusions about that. Okay. I thought you were going to say something different because actually I don't see such a connection between that and this. But we do have, God knows, a zealotry problem. We have it in Israel among the Jewish community, and God knows every other religious tradition that I know of also has a problem that religion brings a lot of beautiful stuff into the world. Healing, wholeness, connections to God, peace, all those things. But religion, since throughout all of human history, also has a problem with zealots and fanatics who think they have exclusive access to uh, um,
Yeah.
God's truth. Um, so I guess what we're trying to do with Pincus brings to the surface the question of how does how do people of faith deal with the zealotry problem that's in their own midst? Okay, so I'm not going to take your bait and talk about Gaza because I think smart, ethical people will come to different conclusions about the justice of that. But we do, but nobody can deny that we have a Pinchas, let's call it the Pinchas problem. And the problem is what happens when you have zealots and fanatics in your community who inevitably turn to violence in the name of your sacred scriptures. That's the question that Pinchas raises. And we see, I'm trying to show you, like the rabbis recognize this is a problem from their very inception and are trying to mitigate it. They did that with Elijah too. Elijah is this violent figure in the Bible. Somehow these wonderful, imaginative, moral rabbis turned him into a symbol of world peace. That's awesome to me. That's the best of what religion does in a lot of ways to me. Um, John?
Assuming that what you're saying, the rabbis or some of them were critical of Pincus, it seems like a little twitch or in the Torah is a very subtle kind of rebuke. So my question is, did the rabbis more forthrightly and explicitly question the rightness of what Pincus did?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm trying to show. And it's definitely what I tried to do last week also. My favorite, I'm thinking back to our conversation last week, and the rabbi, like, they can't outright say Pinchas was wrong because the Torah says Pinchas was right. Instead, to say, oh, no, 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 but the message is far more subtle than that. For instance, my favorite interpretation from last week was when they point out that the Torah portion splits the first half of the story and the last set of the story. So you have to come back 2 weeks in a row to the synagogue to hear the whole story. And they say That's because, or it wasn't quite that point. They and then they said that the Torah portion of Pinchas is always read alone. It's never linked with another Torah portion. Why? And the rabbis said that's because a zealot always at the end ends up standing alone, and God forbid you live in a generation where all the zealots get together. That to me seems like a condemnation of Pinchas, but it's in a roundabout way because when you read against the grain of the Torah text, you have to do it in a roundabout way if you respect the text. That's what they're doing. Um, I got one more really good one to show you, but let's hear from Ronnie.
So I was reading from the study Bible,
Good.
and the study Bible gives us the context of what was happening
Hmm.
at the time. And at the time, the people of Israel were, uh, according to God, needed to be wiped out because of all of their sins. And um, I think Moses interjected and he got God uh, permission. And Pincus was so enraged by everything that was still happening, he slayed the two, I'm calling them adulterers. But
Hmm.
the interesting thing that I found was after God stopped the plague or whatever was happening, but after all this happened, the last of the original Israelites, that generation, died, and then the rest were able to go on into Israel. So
Hmm.
I thought that was a very interesting context. And of course, as far as the violence,
But
uh, I can only think of the ice agents today. So, yes and no. Violence sometimes, not necessarily zealots, but violence sometimes needs to be accepted. And I'm ambivalent against this. I personally don't like violence,
sure,
but if you're attacked, then I believe you need to protect yourself.
sure.
So I
Okay.
leave it at that.
So thank you for all of that, Ronnie, for sure. See, here's the problem. I'm going to just try to rephrase what I've said a couple of times in a slightly different way. The Even if the Torah says that what Pinchas did was kosher and was great and ethical and appropriate, the rabbis have a problem. The problem is we're trying to run communities here, and we don't need communities full of people who say, I'm going to be the next Pinchas, that I'm going to drive inspiration from this story and I'm going to behave like he did. So they're going to try to see, can we box it off and say that was a unique moment in history, but don't be like Pincus. So here's two more things for us before we're all done. Um, and I really appreciate this conversation today, everybody. Your insights have been great, and they've really helped me with my thinking too. I appreciate it a lot. I got two more comments on the page here in our final minutes. One is from a contemporary Haredi rabbi in Brooklyn who has a lovely Kabbalistic interpretation. Maybe we won't read through it, but he's very curious about the broken Vav here, which I put back on the page in its brokenness has two halves, a lower half and an upper half. And he is going to draw a Kabbalistic interpretation of this, saying this is connected to the spiritual task that he thinks Pinchas accomplishes of drawing down heaven at the same time raising up humanity that the brokenness of this shalom shows this kind of separation, this distance between the heavenly realm and the earthly realm. But the task of the Kabbalist is try to draw those two things together. If you like those sorts of interpretations, I encourage you to read what he wrote in his own words. But let's give the last word to Rabbi Kushner, my neighbor of blessed memory here in Natick, Massachusetts, the great Harold Kushner. Let's see what he does with this. And you're gonna find he's very much on the same page of where Ronnie is and where others are who are looking for a criticism of Pinchas and a desire to end this on a note of peace, not of violent retribution. So here's Kushner, Rabbi Kushner. I'll read it for the sake of our time here. In the text of the Torah, he notices there's a second idiosyncrasy about this verse. In the text of the Torah scroll, the letter Yud in Pinchas's name, in this one place, in verse 11, is written smaller than all the other letters. That's why I put this here in the middle for you to see. Pinchas's name is spelled Pei Yud Nun Chet Samech with this Yud here. But the Yud in his name in that one place is written very small. Why? And for contrast, here's a regular Yud. And here's the small Yud of Pinchas. You see, it's written diminished. Why? When we commit violence, even justifiable violence, the Yud in us is diminished. And Yud can symbolize two things. Yud symbolizes the name of God. Yud Hey Vav Hey. So Yud is the godliness in us or in the world, and violence pushes God away. Even just violence, it still is coarsening to the soul. So he says the Yud in us standing for the name of God and also for Yehudi. Yud also means Yid, a Jew. And violence, even when it's justified, still comes at a cost to us. That's what he's saying. And we're diminished. What about the broken Vav? Here's Rabbi Kushner again. In verse 12, the letter Vav in Shalom is written with a break in its stem. We know that. We've been talking about that all day. This is interpreted homiletically to suggest that the sort of peace one achieves by destroying one's opponent will inevitably be a flawed and incomplete peace.
Yes, that's what
There's Rabbi Kushner. You like that, Marcia? Well, it sort of sums up something that you taught us an hour ago, so I'm not surprised that you like it. So I hope you enjoyed this today. I just wanted to do this, as we do sometimes, to just focus in on one verse and even one word from the Torah and see all the myriad traditions and lessons and values that our tradition derives from the Torah, because that's what we do. Like even every word counts, even the shapes and the unique calligraphy of the letters count. That's something we learned from Rabbi Akiva back in the days of the Talmud. So that's what I wanted to do with you today. I hope you enjoyed this discussion today.
Thank you.
And we'll be back next week. I hope you keep coming back. And
Thank you,
I'll
Neil.
see you
It's
next time.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Neil. It was so great.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.